This podcast is called How is Universal Design for Learning Different than Accommodation? Let's begin with familiar territory. The concept of accommodation refers to the process of providing supports to persons with disabilities. Take a look at this definition from the University of Washington's DeWitt Center. They say that an accommodation is an alteration of environment, curriculum format, or equipment that allows access for an individual with disability. It's as if we have this binary notion of people who are normal and can easily fit into our pre-constructed notions of target students. And then there's these two, awkward. They don't really fit with our constructs, with our way of teaching and assessing students. So to provide them access, we need to do something extra. We need to provide them with some sort of supports through accommodations, modifications, in order to enable them to access the curriculum. They might be accessing the same curriculum, but doing so in a different way from their peers. Let's break this down a little bit. If we think about accommodations as being for people with disabilities, then in the same breath we're suggesting that they are not for people without disabilities. Let me see if I can present this another way. This image might be familiar to you. It's of three people who are trying to watch a baseball game over a picket fence. Each of them is receiving the same degree of support. It's enough for two of them, but not enough for the person on the right, whose support needs are not being met. In other words, this person does not have access to the game. In the image on the right, however, all three of them have access, and this was achieved by providing equitable distribution of accommodations modifications. In other language, we're suggesting that accommodations, modifications, and assistive technologies ought to be used for those who need them in accordance with their needs, and not given to those who do not need them. This makes sense, right? Well, one of the implications of this is that if we were somehow, theoretically, to remove the people with disabilities from the classroom, we would get to a place in which accommodation, theoretically, is no longer necessary. I'm curious to see if this is true. When we look at this block of students, the normals, I'm wondering what we mean when we talk about normal students. When we look at the way many learning environments are designed, particularly in higher education, it seems as though we mean that normal students are quite homogeneous. They learn in approximately the same way, express their learning in approximately the same way, engage in approximately the same way. Those who don't are the exception, right? About that. In the last 10, 15, 20 years of neurological and educational research, what we have come to learn is that variability is predictable, gradual, and systematic, rather than rare, binary, or static. By this we mean, not only are there significant differences among individuals, but significant differences within individuals at different times, different settings, different circumstances. The old binary just doesn't cut it. Let's take a look at what it looks like when we use the practices that we currently or historically have found useful. Currently, we have instruction that targets the average student. For example, we represent ideas through lecture, or maybe through textbook reading. For students with disabilities or other exceptionalities, these formats may not be accessible. Thus, they might receive supports through transcripts, for example, for a student with a hearing impairment, translations for a student for whom English is a second language. Others may not find the content challenging enough to remain engaged. Maybe they can enroll in an honors program and assume additional work and challenge. And that just leaves well, that can't be right. As a designer, our mantra must always be this question of what if? What if we could expand the flexibility of our first wave of instructional design? For example, instead of just falling back on traditional teaching methods of lecture and textbook reading, what if we provided multiple ways that the students could represent and have content represented to them? What if we provided multiple ways for students with different interests, with different backgrounds, to engage in the content of their courses? What if we found different ways for students to choose to express what they have learned in order to actually increase the validity of our assessments? What if we were to recognize that what we mean by disability or ability need not be binary, but maybe, as the UDL proponents suggest, a gradual, systematic variance that exists across the population? What if we implemented universal design for learning? To understand universal design for learning, I think it's helpful to contrast what UDL is compared to the way that we think in the accommodations model. Previously, we spoke of how barriers create the need for accessibility. I'm going to refer to this now as the accommodations model. It relates to what Carol Gill refers to as the medical model of disability, which I paraphrase here. In the medical model of disability, which accommodations seek to address, disability is a deficiency of an individual. It's being disabled is negative. Disability resides in the individual, and the individual needs to be fixed. So in this image, for example, which has often been seen as a very positive thing, where everybody now has access, we've made the assumption that they should all be normal. They should all be the same height. And if somebody is not the same height, then they need some sort of artificial enhancement to bring them up to speed to be normal. However, universal design for learning challenges these perspectives. In UDL, we may recognize that an individual has an impairment, but we do not recognize that that impairment must be disabling. Environments may disable anyone, and poorly designed environments are more likely to disable people with impairments. This fits more closely with the social model of disability, again from Gill, and again which I paraphrase. In the social model of disability, disability is difference. Being disabled is neutral. Disability is in the interaction of an individual and an environment, and it is that interaction which needs to be fixed. In this case, replacing the barrier of the picket fence with a chain link fence provides visibility to the baseball field for people whatever their height may be. In our analogy, this is similar to designing learning environments in which content is presented in different ways, engagement is curated in different ways, the ways that the students can express themselves are variable, the environment has become more flexible. It's not that the individuals have changed, but the way that they are able to engage, respond, and interact with the environment has changed. One more point. Going back to the image we explored previously, where the accommodations model may fail to maximize the benefit for students who are neither average nor fringe, one must be cautioned not to make the mistake of thinking that UDL may completely replace the needs for accommodations. The UDL model certainly expands the range in which we meet students' needs up front, and which reduces the need for accommodations and modifications, but it doesn't mean that we don't have certain students who will still need additional supports. This doesn't negate the benefits of UDL, but it does imply that for maximum accessibility, we ought to see a joint effort in which UDL is our first wave, where we meet the needs of the widest range of individuals reasonably possible, and then we still will meet the needs of individuals who are beyond the scope of what we have provided through UDL. What we are finding in the literature and in practice is that this is both the most effective and the most efficient way to provide access to learning for everyone.